All right. Okay, great. Well, I think we're ready to go ahead and get started. For those of you who are joining us here today, I'm very happy to get a chance to talk with you. My name is Lauren Jones. I'm the Senior Director of College Credit Plus curriculum and work with our K-12 partnerships at Columbus State Community College. And I get to be joined here by a good colleague, Eric, and I'll let you introduce yourself, Eric.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Grebing. I'm with the Surf Center at UNC Greensboro, and I've had the pleasure of being a partner in evaluation with the team at Columbus State over the last 5 years. So I'll be kind of sharing some of the results from the evaluation of the project after Lauren gives some of the details on what Columbus State did. So it's a pleasure to have you all with us.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Well, we'll go ahead and get started on our session. And then as people join in, by all means, if you have questions, put those into the chat and we'll engage in conversation through that and take a couple different breaks in the presentation here so that we can stay in communication. For those of you who don't know a lot about Ohio, wanted to put up some information here about Columbus State Community College. We're a fairly large community college right in the heart of downtown Columbus in Ohio. And you can see that we have a couple of different campuses and then some regional learning centers, and really offer that mix between both career technical education and then transferable credit and lots of different opportunities for students. So we've got about over 40,000 students each year that participate, and our dual enrollment population is an increasingly large percentage of those 40,000 students. So we have about 6,000, a little over 6,000 dual enrollment students every semester. And so that translates to over 8,000 per year that are just dual enrollment high school students. Throughout this presentation, you'll hear me refer to College Credit Plus because in Ohio, the dual enrollment program is called College Credit Plus, or CCP for short. So if you hear me talking with those acronyms, you'll know a little bit about that. It's just what we call dual enrollment in the state of Ohio. Importantly, dual enrollment in the state of Ohio has been state legislated. So the CCP program requires school districts to pay for their students to participate in the dual enrollment program. And they pay not just for tuition, but also for textbooks for the students. So it's a really great opportunity for students, and school districts have maybe some mixed emotions about that need to have to pay for everything themselves through the state-sponsored program. When we're talking about the project here today, I wanted to situate it in context of a number of other grants and regional work that our community college had been developing both before and during the time frame of this project. So we'll be talking about a 5-year grant through the Department of Education. And leading up to this, we had already engaged in a lot of work in partnership with other areas around the region. So one of those things is the Central Ohio Compact, and that's a consortium of business leaders, educators, and higher education professionals that came together to try to solve different elements for the workforce and the future of Ohio. So we already had really strong partnerships through that alliance and through the yearly convenings that those individuals had. We also had started on a work through AEP Credits Count to continue to develop some post-secondary dual enrollment type of options. And then, of course, CCP was legislated, and the whole dual enrollment program really grew overnight, particularly for us. So you can see here that leading up to this CCRE work, which is also called the Investing in Innovation, or I3 work, that we had a lot of different grants that laid the groundwork and the foundation for what we ended up pursuing. Specifically, what this grant that we're talking about today includes is that this was really a grant to look at changing the future of the region. And so we were looking at how we could support economic mobility in Central Ohio and do that through increasing the number of students who are able to get post-secondary education credit, and what we could do with the early college high school model. And I think it's important to note that in Ohio, that title of being an early college high school is a little bit tense and has some different connotations. And so we decided to adopt the model of early college high schools rather than the name itself. And so within comprehensive high schools, we infused those early college high school models and really worked with 7 unique high school districts. And I'll talk to you a little bit in just a moment about what those districts were like. We were focusing on dual enrollment. And again, in Ohio, that was called College Credit Plus. And also really wanted to focus on what happened after students left high school. So that idea of establishing a college going culture and really being focused on both access and equity. Those were all key pillars of our I3 work that we're talking about here today. The grant itself has ended, but as you'll hear throughout this presentation, the work continues. And so specifically, we had been partnering in a number of different ways with the K-12 districts across our region. And then we partnered with some outside organizations as well. So our local educational service center was a key member of the early work of this grant, as was Jobs for the Future, which provided a lot of technical assistance and coaching for both college partners and high school personnel. This is work that, while the community college in this particular case was the convener and sort of the owner of the grant, it was really a grant about partnerships. So we needed a lot of district and school staff supports. And in fact, earlier this morning, Julie Edmonds shared a little bit more specifically about some of the core instructional framework and the college going culture that different buildings really worked hard to do. Another key aspect of really trying to focus on readiness is looking at readiness throughout a number of different lenses. So we've done some high school and post-secondary collaborations with faculty, and that has resulted in great conversations in the career technical education space, but also a new class that we're calling Third Space, which is an English collaboration between high school faculty and college faculty, where they've created a course that's a readiness course for students to be able to transition from high school to college level English. We also had a college success skills course that we called Coles 1101, kind of like a basic freshman seminar course that was tailored specifically to the dual enrollment population. And then we also had a pre-college math course that was a modularized computer enhanced program where students could work on math skills and develop through what they would have had to take as remedial courses if they were typical college students, but what they were able to take for free as high school students to again be able to get up to college ready. So really looking at a number of different ways that we could support the student holistically. Speaking of supports, it takes much more than just academics, as many of you know. So we were looking at things like Starfish, which was our tool to be able to communicate with high school counselors and give them warnings when a student was starting to drop or fall behind. Academic advising that was unique and specific to the I3 districts where we were working. There was tutoring and supplemental instruction that was part of that, as well as partnerships from 2 community organizations, I Know I Can, and Communities in Schools, that were both supporting different elements of students' holistic needs. Another really big piece to all of this, of course, was trying to give students guidance for their long-term careers. So mapping out their academic pathways and having folks at the college who could work with leaders at the K-12 level to really think through what that looked from a student experience perspective and what made sense in the specific buildings to guide students between that transition space, navigating high school to college. As I talked about, that term early college high school was a little bit different in Ohio and among the schools that we were working with. And so we modified that to consider the early college high school model and be able to have that in place at a comprehensive high school. And so there are a couple of things called out on this slide that are probably very familiar to those of you who have been working in the early college high school space. So things like having academic programs that emphasized college and career readiness, having that college culture through the Head Start program of just making sure that there are college readiness behaviors being talked about, and really focusing on the fact that high school is not the end destination for students, but rather a piece of their journey toward career. And then again, that holistic piece, recognizing that wraparound student services are really important. And underpinning all of that would be the school level organizational practices. So having data teams, being able to interrogate that data, looking at how students are doing, and really thoughtfully diving into that. All of that became important for our high schools and was adapted in varying ways by the different schools. Specifically here, you'll see a little bit of our logic model in terms of how we had set this up to work. So from an early experience, we focused on a regional I3 cabinet, which was made up of all of our 7 district partner schools. And those district partners came from the 7 schools in the region that all had a very high percentage of students on free and reduced lunch, and a high percentage of students who would be first generation in terms of college going behavior. So when this grant started, we began by having the I3 cabinet come together from monthly meetings, and then developed district plans based on that work. One of the things that we learned across the period of the grant was that it was very important to start compartmentalizing how one specific district needed to infuse the aspects of the early college high school model in a different way than some of the others did. So we moved away from the regional cabinet meetings and into more specific building level or district level conversations. Our curricular development and alignment work continued with this idea of 9 through 14 pathways, and the idea of trying to really infuse as much career readiness as possible and make sure that those students were ready. And so many of our schools had very explicit ways of reminding students about the possibilities of their future after they left high school. And that's really what we wanted them to be talking about. You can see here too that we had some long and short-term outcomes that we were looking at for students to be able to hit. And I'm going to take a breath here and pause, because moving next, Eric's going to share with you a little bit more about the data of what we found from doing all of this. So as we do some somewhat awkward transition between who's sharing their screen, now is a great time to get some questions. And so as I move from presenting to being able to see those questions, if there's anything that I'm not seeing, Eric, if you can help me from the chat if there's anything in there, and then we'll go from there.
Sure thing. And I don't see any questions yet, but our host Dina has put a message in the chat. So just a reminder to everybody, as questions come up, we'll kind of be pausing between transitions. So just go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll be happy to field those as we go. So at this point, I am going to transition to sharing my screen, and wanted to start by talking a bit about the evaluation design. And so what we're looking at here is a situation where Columbus State found a group of schools in the region that were going to be good partners for this work, and we're also serving a population of students who were underrepresented in higher education. So the districts that they worked with really did focus on students who came from more economically disadvantaged backgrounds. So what we wanted to look at was, well, what changed over the course of the grant period? So when CCRE was implemented, what was the difference between the baseline year, 2015-16 was the year before the program started, and then really going up to year 4, which was the fun year of 2019-20, and had some implications for some of our work. So some of the findings that you'll see will only cover year 3 because some of the things that we were measuring were not able to be measured due to the pandemic year. But the important part here with this evaluation design is that we're not just looking at changes over time within the schools that were in the program, that concurrent to all the different things that Columbus State was doing with the schools that were part of CCRE, there were other policy pieces and just general changes in the world that were going on that affected all schools within the state of Ohio. And so in order to do that comparison, we found a group of similar high schools in other parts of the state of Ohio that had similar demographic characteristics and similar background academic measures, like the same percentage of students taking dual enrollment at the beginning of the program. And we compared the changes in the program schools to those comparison schools over time. So whenever you look at the results, know that the impacts that we're testing are from the CCRE schools compared to those similar schools and those changes over time. So we had a couple of outcomes that we looked at across this study. One was dealing with on track in grades 9 and 10. So really looking at early and high school academic achievement. And I'll talk a little bit more about what those measures were specifically. We also looked at staying in school, which we operationalized through the dropout rate in the program versus the comparison schools. And the final outcomes that are probably of most interest to this audience today are those in college course taking and college credits. And so we'll kind of treat each of those 3 as buckets of outcomes that we looked at across the study. I like to present the results first, just so you kind of get a taste of what we're going to see. And so there were a lot of really positive things to share that we were able to find within this impact analysis. First of all, we did find positive program impacts on the percentage of both 9th and 10th grade students who are on track. And I'll talk a bit about what these graduation points mean in a second, but basically that was just a metric to show that they were on track to graduate from high school on time. We did not find any significant impacts on dropout rates. We did find positive program impacts on college course enrollment, and this was true pretty much across all subgroups that we looked at. And the other key finding there was that the increases in CCP or dual enrollment were not at the expense of AP enrollment. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time later on talking about that as well, because that's a really key finding from the study. We also did not find significant impacts on the average number of college credits earned at high school graduation, but there were a couple of factors that contributed to this, and the story has a lot of facets to it, and I'll try to unpack a little bit of that as well. So to first start out with the 9th and 10th on track sample, we looked at students in grades 9 and 10 who were enrolled in the study schools, either the treatment or the comparison schools, a majority of the school year, so 95% of the school year or greater. We used an outcome definition that was specific to the state of Ohio. And one of the pathways for high school graduation allows students to earn points on their end of course exams. And so depending on their level of exams, there are 7 different courses. They can earn between 1 and 5 points depending on their achievement level. And then the total of those points can lead toward a fulfillment of a graduation pathway. And so in consultation with our colleagues at Columbus State and with the Ohio Department of Ed, we found that we had 2 definitions that by the end of 9th grade, students should have at least 5 points total. And by the end of 10th grade, at least 15 points total. And so this is what we used as our definition for whether or not a student was on track. As you can see here in the results, the treatment bars are in dark blue. That shows a significant result. The comparison bars are in gray. You can see that for both 9th and 10th grade, in the years that we measured, we saw positive impacts on the numbers of students who were on track for those numbers of graduation points. And so you can see the percentage point impacts were roughly 6 and 6.5 in those 2 grade levels. But I think it's useful sometimes to break down these types of numbers in terms of the numbers of students that were impacted. And so we estimate, based on this percentage point impact, that an additional 449 students were on track for 9th grade than would have been if they didn't attend one of these CCRE high schools. So that's really big, especially when we're talking about schools that are serving predominantly economically disadvantaged populations, that this on-track piece, even though it's not specifically about dual enrollment, certainly undergirds students' ability to access dual enrollment and to access post-secondary opportunities post-high school. I do want to spend a moment on dropout rate as well. We did not have a significant finding here, although I will say that the direction of the impact was in the direction that we wanted. So it was, the dropout rate did decline slightly in our treatment schools. But it also wasn't particularly surprising because this particular program, you have to focus on a certain set of elements, and dropout rate was not something that was as focused on as dual enrollment opportunities and instruction. And so this was kind of in line with the program theory that this was not a significant emphasis and thus didn't show a significant result at the end. Now, I do want to spend the most time talking about the college course taking outcomes. And for our sample, we used all students in the study schools in grades 10 through 12. And you might be asking yourself, why didn't we use grade 9? And the reason for this was that one of the schools during the study period actually transitioned from having ninth grade in their comprehensive high schools to having a separate ninth grade academy. So we kind of needed to update our analysis to just look at grades that were consistent over the study period. So we just updated that to be grades 10 through 12. As you'll notice here, we broke out the impacts on college course enrollment in a couple of different ways. So one was we wanted to understand college level course taking, and we defined this by either College Credit Plus or dual enrollment or advanced placement. We also would have counted IB courses, but none of the schools that were in our sample had IB, so they're omitted from this particular analysis. But as you'll notice here, we saw significant impacts of a little over 7 percentage points, both in the either College Credit Plus or advanced placement, and in the College Credit Plus or dual enrollment categories. I'll also note here that this treatment bar that's in the light blue signifies that it was not statistically significant, but yet, even though these schools were similar at the beginning, the treatment schools actually grew in advanced placement a little bit more than the comparison schools. And we want to point this out because it's a really important part of the story that oftentimes dual enrollment and advanced placement programs are sometimes pitted against each other, and that you have to borrow from one program in order to serve students in another. This program and Columbus State's work really shows that that's not necessarily the case, that you can grow dual enrollment opportunities significantly for students while still keeping advanced placement programs in place and strong with those different populations. So this was kind of a unique result that we don't always see in dual enrollment evaluations. That's a really important part of the story of the work in Central Ohio. I also wanted to break out here, so this is for the students who took either set of courses. In the top bar here, you see the same top bars that we had in the previous graphic. This is all students. I want you to notice here that across the different subgroups, so we had economically and non-economically disadvantaged, as well as underrepresented race and ethnicity and not, that we saw consistently positive percentage point impacts across all of these different groups. And this was really a testament to the focus of the program on equity and making sure that students from all backgrounds had similar opportunities. That's not to say that there's not still significant gaps between these students, but the growth that occurred within these schools was not simply for the high flyer students or the students who did not come from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. The impacts really were for all students across the schools. Finally, I want to talk a bit about college credits earned. This sample is a little bit different, and one of the reasons for this is that the administrative data that we had access to did not take into account college credits as they were earned. So in Ohio, they only get reported to the state agency when a student graduates from high school. And thus our analysis is limited to only students at high school graduation. So our sample for this are limited to only students who graduated in the classes of 2019 and 2020. And just like we did for college course taking, we include both the number of dual credits and the number of equivalent credits earned for different AP scores. And we used a crosswalk with Ohio University to determine how many college credits each AP score was worth by subject area. As you'll notice here, the main headline for this analysis is that there were no significant impacts on the college credits earned when we look at those two graduating cohorts. I will say, though, that you'll note that by the light blue bars that all of these impacts were not statistically significant. And in fact, we saw tremendous variation across both the schools in the program and in the comparison school in terms of strategies for college credit. So some schools really tried to get a large percentage of students with a few college credits. Other schools focused on getting a smaller proportion of students a larger number of college credits. And that variation is picked up within these numbers. And I'll get back to that whenever we look at some other aspects of the analysis. But I think it's important to note here that we were not able to capture students who are still in high school who benefited from this program. So students who are in the graduating class who just finished in 2021, as well as in the class of 2022 and 2023, who benefited from this program and earned college credits, weren't yet in this sample. So those students aren't represented here, and it's certainly something that we want to continue to track over time. We also looked at the outcomes in a few other ways, just to make sure that we were telling a full story. So we looked at the percentage of students earning any college credit, and particularly any dual credit. And you'll notice here that we had significant and positive impacts in both of those categories. We also saw positive but not significant impacts for students earning 3 or more dual credits, and in terms of students earning credit from an AP exam. So what this is showing us here is that in the treatment schools, we saw a lot of students taking advantage of some introductory college courses that only earn them 1 or 2 college credits, but that these courses were accessed by a larger group of students. So they were earning dual credit, but not necessarily a large number. It's also illustrated by this graph here, and this is a set of 2 histograms comparing the comparison to the treatment schools. And you can read this in terms of bins of college credits earned. So this first bucket is students earning more than 0, but up to 1, more than 1 and up to 3. And you can keep on going across with different numbers of college credits all the way to those earning more than 45 and up to 60 and more than 60 college credits. The pattern that we see from this graph is that the CCRE schools in all of the buckets leading up to 45 credits, there is a slight edge in terms of the percentage of graduates earning college credit in each of those bins. Where we see the departure is at the right end of the distribution, where we see a larger proportion of students in some of the comparison schools earning a very large number of college credits. And when we get over here to the 60 credit plus bucket, this represents students earning an associate degree or similar numbers of credits of an associate degree. And so as you can imagine, that's going to skew the averages that we see overall. And thus, when we look at the results as a whole, we definitely see larger number of college credits earned at these smaller numbers, but slightly lower areas of focus on the really large numbers of college credits within the CCRE schools. So I wanted to go back here, now that you've had a chance to dig into some of the details, to just provide again that high level view of the impact analysis summary. That again, we saw positive impacts on track and college course enrollment, and the enrollment was not at the expense of AP enrollment. And we did not see significant impacts on dropout rates, and we did not see significant impacts on the number of college credits earned. And there are a variety of reasons to kind of help tell that different story. In addition to this, we had some qualitative findings that we did through an implementation study that complemented this impact work. My colleague Julie Edmonds is presenting on more details with this particular aspect of the work. But as you can see here, and as Lauren alluded to before, there were a variety of strategies used to expand access. And it was really Columbus State being strategic about trying to overcome particularly these barriers that came up in different forms along the way, that the solutions looked a little bit different for each of the districts that they worked with. And one of the strengths of this program was really that partnership between Columbus State and each of those individual schools. We also noted that schools created a future orientation. And this was something when we asked staff members in the K-12 environments to reflect on what was different at the end of the program from the beginning, that there was really a shift in focus from just preparing students for high school graduation to really helping them think about what their next steps were after high school. And dual enrollment was one really crucial strategy to help make that future real to them. So they were not only getting to experience the college environment, they were earning college courses, interacting with college instructors, and taking courses that were leading toward credentials that would help them with their future careers. And you can see a quote here from one of the staff members in our schools that it really did change the level of focus. And that's something that we've seen, even now that the grant has ended, that has sustained within each of those school environments. Finally, here I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the strength of the partnership that really drove this work. And as you can see here, partners work together across the 5 years of the CCRE grant to do a lot of things. I'll also talk about here that Columbus State, as a 2-year institution leading a dual enrollment early college initiative, was really in a unique position because they're kind of at the intersection between K-12, higher ed, and local employers. And as a result of that unique perspective, they were really able to bridge some of those gaps and some of those silos that sometimes exist and are barriers to dual enrollment programs. There were a lot of factors that we observed, including a willingness to really start with where the districts were, allowing them to sort of chart some different paths to getting to the same goals. There were also a lot of staff members on the Columbus State side who had worked both in K-12 and higher ed. And that kind of bridging the gap in terms of experiences really helped to understand where there was dissonance sometimes in language and made sure that people were understanding what was happening. And then finally, this is something that Columbus State has really done over time, is not only did they hire staff during the grant period, but they sustained those positions beyond the grant period to sustain dual enrollment supports within schools with a population of students who need additional supports and are continuing to do that now. And I think it's really strengthened their ability to support dual enrollment across the region. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Lauren, but again, we'll pause to see if there's anything that we need to address with questions from the audience.
I haven't seen any questions yet, so I'll go ahead and start to share my screen, but certainly if anyone has those questions, by all means, please add them to the chat. There we go. Really happy to continue talking with you all about this particular work. And Eric did such a great job of explaining many of the findings that came out from this. And I think one of the things that I took away from his conversation too is that this work existed for the purposes of a grant, but the focus that we have as a community college and the partnership that we have with our K-12 colleagues is not ending just because the grant ended. And that really meant that the last, I would say, 1.5 years, if not 2 years of the grant was very much focused on sustainability, so that we could be ready for that moment that the grant funding ended, but that the work could continue. So in terms of what is next and where we're going in the future, obviously we have learned a lot from this work, and I think it helped so much to have some experts who had K-12 backgrounds that were working at the community college and could keep advocating for their K-12 colleagues. And really that has shaped the entire college in terms of how we need to think about K-12 and how we need to involve those stakeholders in so many of the efforts and initiatives that we have for students, because we know that that continuum of lifelong learning is dramatically important for long-term student success. We, of course, are going to continue to promote college course taking. We think that's certainly very important, and recognize too that both AP and dual credit can coexist peacefully. So we believe that dual credit through CCP is a great option for a lot of students. We also know that many students are going to want to do the AP option. And so our schools are continuing to offer both. And that works well for the districts. So I think that that's important. One of the things that we've learned is that arts and sciences were sort of the first courses that many of our high school partners gravitated towards. So those first year English courses, sociology, psychology, history classes have been extremely popular, and that's great for students that are looking to ultimately earn that four-year degree. But we've really been trying to think through how career technical education, whether that's through our dual enrollment program or articulation agreements or what we call C-tags, one way or another of getting students those college credits is also really important, and probably the next phase of the work that we need to do to keep building on the great partnerships and pathways that have been available for students. We're also really looking at the idea of college readiness as being more than just a placement test. So pre-COVID, we had a placement test that demonstrated to students that they were college ready, but we knew that that placement test wasn't perfect. Post-COVID, we're certainly looking at GPA as a factor for deciding whether or not a student is college ready per the state of Ohio standards for our CCP program. But we believe that it's a lot more than just the GPA or the indicator on a placement test. And so both through our math option and our English option, looking at trying to come up with strategies to help students before they take that college course. And our philosophy behind that is that it needs to be a collaborative experience. So it cannot just be the college coming down to a K-12 setting and saying, oh, you should be teaching this and it should be this way. We really use the philosophy of a third space, meaning a third type of partnership. It's not wholly the high school, it's not wholly the college, it's some other entity where we need to come together to be able to solve the really tough problems with student readiness. So that philosophy underpinning our work is really important. And then we've had the good fortune for Third Space itself to be the name of our English readiness program. And we're really excited about that. We've been working with the state on some innovative program waivers as well to make career technical education courses available to students, even when their GPA is maybe not the cumulative GPA that the state has decided at that 3.0 level. So really trying to look again at how we can think of readiness in different ways to help students be prepared for the college courses and benefit from that early momentum of taking college coursework. And then finally, one of the really exciting things that's come out of this I3 work and some of our other grant initiatives is the recognition at the college that we need a whole K-12 strategy. So for so long, colleges defined themselves as not K-12 and really focused on the student post-high school graduation. And now instead, we're reorienting our perspective at the college and seeing K-12 as a vital part of what we do. We've got these 8,000 dual enrollment students every year, 8,000 plus really, and need to be a college that's ready for that and in tune with that and doing much better to help bridge that gap between secondary to post-secondary. And so that has been very exciting, and we've worked with some consultants and internal teams to start shaping together a strategy that will inform our work moving forward and will inform the grants that we want to move into the future. As we close out, just wanted to share, lots of thank yous, because it has been truly a team effort. So I am here speaking on behalf of Columbus State, but by no means am I alone part of this work. There have been so many people and such a great team, from our faculty to our administrators that are working on this, and having the meetings before the meetings and the meetings after the meetings to continue the partnership and make things really strong. And we've just been so fortunate to get to work with SERV as well, to have that external evaluator, which has really helped inform how we approach this work and helped us in so many ways. So many thanks to all of those individuals and to all of you for learning a little bit more with us. I've put up here the website address for our I3 toolkit. One of the deliverables from this grant work is that we would find a way to share some of the lessons that we've learned. And so we've got briefs from both JFF and SERV that are up there, as well as some other tools and materials that we've learned from. So by all means, please visit that website to be able to learn a little bit more about the work that we did within the I3 grant, and then certainly reach out to either of us with more questions. And at that, I'll take a moment to look at the chat and see if there are questions. And for those of you who haven't started to type your questions in yet, now is a great time to do so if there's anything else you'd like to discuss.
I just looked, I don't see any new chats in there. We'll give everybody a few minutes here to add those.
Great question. I just saw, Tevin, your question about the payment structure. So what happens in the state of Ohio through the legislative process is that schools receive money from the state for the purpose of dual enrollment and college credit plus, and then they have to pay that money back to the state based on how many students are taking courses, and then of course they have to pay the college for the cost of the textbooks. It is controversial in that sense. High school districts were not necessarily delighted at first that this happened, but we have made believers out of a lot of our district partners. So even though I had one district partner who shared with me that they paid over $80,000 in textbook costs last year, they believed that it was in the best interest of their students, and they saw the positive movement that came from it. So it remains something that we would love to see the state directly pay for, rather than give money to the schools and then have to take it back. I think that that would be a great improvement, but as of now, that's where the legislation is. So I'm not sure if there are other questions, but I'm happy to stick around here. And I've got some kiddos that just came home too, which is always exciting. But really, really grateful to all of you for listening today, and happy to connect with you in the future if you have any questions that you'd like to ask.